you probably don't remember this, but a long time ago, I interviewed you about the Grammy Synthesizer Showdown. I might ask you some more questions about that. It blew my mind at the time. But what I think was interesting about that was for basically frontmen, like they were solo stars who also played keyboards. They, and up
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
before that, maybe there were famous people like Nick Rhodes or whatever, but like usually the keyboardist was in a band in the back.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of an open-ended question, but do you see yourself maybe because that was a little unusual time as kind of a pioneer in that way? Even now I don't, there aren't that many like synthesizer players that are up in the foreground like you were or like Thomas Dolby was.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good question. Well, you see, my big hero when I was growing up was Keith Emerson, and he was frontman and keyboard player. And he was like the Jimi Hendrix of keyboards, sticking knives in the keys and rolling over the stage with a Hammond on top of him. And I mean, absolutely outrageous, but the most exciting thing ever. And that's where I got my biggest early influence as a keyboard player. Yeah, you can be the front man and play keyboards. And I developed that idea with like portable keyboards. They hadn't made them at that time, but I strapped, Moog Prodigies around my neck and played them, and you had wires coming out, and roadies used to feed them out to me. And it was any way to stay not that the guy with the glasses at the back of the stage that you never noticed that plays keyboards. And I did not want to be that. That wasn't going to be me.
So you invented the keytar, basically. You
What?
too. It all comes. I love keytars. I've always thought because yeah, you could be like sort of like the guitar hero, or the rock star, but like you were basically creating your own keytars before such a thing existed.
Yeah, I mean, they may have existed, Lindsay, but I wasn't aware of it. So, but I knew I wanted to have keyboard and travel around the stage, so I just strapped it around my neck, and
Amazing.
and it was great. Then I could put it back on the stand when I'm done with it and play it normally. But yeah, that was big part of it. Yeah, but when they finally did come out with ones, then I jumped on that, and
They're
I've been ever since.
Yeah, I love keytars. They just look so friggin' cool, and they look like, you look at them now, and they look very retro, but they still kind of look like the future at the same time because they just look weird in a good way.
The only thing is, I never liked the ones with the full size keys because they
Mm.
ridiculous. Looks like you've got this huge impediment around, like so always the ones that I've played have been had the little keys. I guess my fingers are slim enough to work with that. And then it doesn't look so stupid, because that's a big thing that can happen with keytars. You have to be careful with them.
I
Otherwise,
see.
it's really dumb.
So, oh, you look cool doing it, and I wish if there's any pictures of you with a Moog just like strapped
Yeah,
around your neck like a necklace, I'd love to see them.
yeah.
So like if that was, a little bit unusual, or I don't know if the word's unfashionable, but like kind of like not in vogue at the time to be like, the front keyboard person in the early 80s. I read something about how you kind of I've been there, but you basically rented out the Marquee Club and did your own record label showcase. I'm wondering, that's quite hustly of you if that's true. Like,
Yeah.
how did you get a deal
Well,
in 83 or so?
yeah, that's right. It was very hard. We didn't actually rent the marquee out. We just organized to do like a residency every
Okay.
Monday night for 4 weeks,
Okay.
and invited all the record companies down, all the publishers down to see me. I mean, it's I guess what a lot of people would do. Make it easy for them. You're in London, you're in Soho, because we weren't based in London, and we were, outside in High Wycombe, which is a very ordinary town. So not very no cool scene going on there. You had to create your own. But yeah, and they all came down, and none of them got it. They just one guy with a load of keyboards around him and a dancer. We can't relate that to anything that we know has been successful in the past. So the typical thing of not being able to spot anything that's original, until one guy did, and but that was back in my hometown at the time. Came to the show, and did get it and got the songs, got the, and his quote was, we missed out on Depeche Mode. We're not going to miss out on this guy.
Well, oh, well
So that's what
said.
he actually said. Yeah. So, and it only takes one person to get you in, because in those days it was so difficult. You had to go through the doorways of the record companies. You couldn't just put your music out, like we can now, and like people can start, from day one putting out their music. You couldn't do it, in those days. So you had to get a label, and you had to get a major label, really. So
The
yeah,
mime art, the dancer, that was
yeah,
definitely a bold choice. And
yeah,
if I'm remembering things correctly, Jed was like a very big part of the whole like vibe for the first album,
yeah.
for Humans Live. I don't remember him being like in the videos for like Dream into Action onward. Like what happened? Like what happened to him being part of your act? What's he doing now?
Well, I continued to work with Jed right through up to the One-to-One album.
Okay.
Which was like, was it getting towards the end of the 80s now? So he was always a big part of our live show. It just wasn't for the videos and stuff. Well, we had done all that, but we worked very hard on creating the characters for him and his costumes and everything, and our interaction, for those first three albums. Yeah, and we're still really good friends, and he is still involved in sometimes we make videos for the live show, and he'll be involved with that. So
Okay.
he's always, yeah.
He was kind of like your Bez, like from the
Yes.
Happy Mondays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even like your hype man, like kind of almost from the rap
Yeah.
tradition of having a hype man,
Yeah.
which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, if there was maybe some difficulty in the beginning of getting record labels or a record label to get it or whatever, I've read in other interviews um that you think you were not considered fashionable or I hope I'm wording this right, or
Yeah.
edgy enough because a lot of songs from like the new
Yeah.
wave post-punk era were like,
Yeah.
kind of dark and miserable, like, The Cure, The Cure is one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
Um,
They're
and I
great.
don't know if that's true of all things. I mean, Duran Duran were pretty bright and happy, but a lot of the stuff at that time was not as anthemic or positive as your stuff. And so
Yeah.
I'd love your thoughts on that, because like why is being dark or miserable or depressed like considered chic, but saying like things can only get better, or like I want an everlasting love isn't hip. Like, why is that? And that happened in the grunge year too, where in the '90s it was more fashionable to be miserable
Yeah.
and hate the world, and say
Yeah.
I'm a creep or whatever. So yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, that's I don't know where to start with that. I mean, it's not that I didn't like any of those bands that you mentioned, or even even the style of their writing or anything, but it wasn't who I was. And I didn't even want to write love songs or anything. I wanted to write songs that were about philosophy. How do you deal with life, and how do you be a successful human being? Because it seems like ridiculously hard to do that. So I want to write songs about that. And I want to be a cheerleader rather than a sort of sympathizer, if you know what I mean. I don't want to, I'm not, I don't, I'm not, we all go through pain and agony and stuff like that. But my thing was like, I want to say, don't crack up, bend your brain, see both sides, throw off your mental change. Let's do it. Let's do it. And and I had no problem at all with people who weren't doing that. But that was just me. That's just I was always wanted to do that. Because that's what I liked from I like songs where people were kind of encouraging me, as a young person to oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can do this. And that's where I wanted to come from with my music. And so that's where it is really. And of course that wasn't considered cool at the time. So I was portrayed as a manufactured pop star in the the cool press, which like what? I'm a, excuse me, I'm playing all the instruments myself on the record. I'm singing. I wrote the songs myself. I did the whole look myself. And you're saying I manufactured. It
Oh
was
my,
like, please. I mean, I can make, but I mean, but the great thing is though, is that gives you such a good, strong spine, to take, because you need to have that in this business. You need to be able to, people will have a go at you at any opportunity, and not everyone. Obviously, the fans are just right with you, but there's people who want to knock you down. So you've got to be tough, to keep going and stick to your what you want to do.
I mean, I think not all of your, I mean, if I think of two of your biggest hits, What Is Love and certainly No One Is to Blame. I mean, those aren't, I mean,
Yeah,
there's hope in those songs, I guess, but
yeah.
I wouldn't say they're like, yay, everything's great type
No,
songs. They're sad, there's
no.
sadness, there's melancholy in those songs.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes, that's true. But it's still coming from the point of view of, no one is to blame. Really, at the end of the day, is about it's really difficult being a human being, and with all the things you have to cope with in your head, all the influences and all the pressures and all the stuff, you know. And if you don't have a view on it, you'll go down a dark road. And so yeah, yeah, but yeah. I
But
agree with you.
do you
Very good.
consider yourself a, like, where did the impetus to want to write from that point of view come from? Like, did
Mm.
you consider yourself like a generally, sorry, positive person, happy person?
Um, I often think that no, it's almost like the opposite. That I was very familiar with cynicism
Mm.
in my own mind. I was very familiar with it, and I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to be a cynic. I wanted to be somebody who just fractionally is on the positive side. I mean, realistic, but come on, we have a hopeful attitude to getting out of it, because otherwise you may as well just give up and that's it, and forget it. But I didn't want to do that. But I was very familiar with a cynical. I mean, I think maybe that's part of British culture to be like that, which is maybe a bit of a problem that we have. But yeah, that's what I felt. That's why I wanted to counteract it with what I was singing about. Yeah.
It's interesting because you just mentioned how you wrote everything, played everything yourself, and there were certain artists of that era where that was really
Mm.
kind of hyped by, the press, or like Prince is the most obvious example, but like,
Yeah.
but then there are some artists where, like yourself, and I would
Mm.
actually say maybe up until later in his career, George Michael, where like that wasn't really emphasized. Like, I don't think a lot of people know that about you. I mean, your
Mm.
fans do, obviously. I don't think like maybe the average person knows that. Do you think it's because it was just like the 80s? I mean, the videos, the bright colors,
Yeah.
the satin
Yeah.
outfits, the keytars. Like, I think if you'd just been like sitting at a grand piano doing your songs, and you do that, you can do that. Like, maybe people would have taken it. I'm not saying people didn't take you seriously. I just don't know if people
No.
know that you were a one-man band, quite literally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I often reflect on how you those initial reviews and stories that are written about you, how they get embedded in in the culture, and it's so hard to break out of them, and you have to spend the rest of your life trying to put the record straight, but maybe that's a good thing, because I'm still doing it, and I'm still very passionate about what I do, to this day. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I would have just sat back if people had gone, oh wow, he plays everything himself, he writes all his own songs, he's like doing things that nobody's ever done before on stage. And if it had been that, if there hadn't been that pushback, maybe I wouldn't have had the impetus to keep going, and be really, it's important to carry on. That's what it says in my lyrics. So I've got to be that.
Absolutely. Is that why you've done in recent years like a lot of these acoustic tours with Nick Beggs, who Nick Beggs is a perfect example, I think, because Kaja
Oh,
Gugu had a silly name. People thought I mean, he is an amazing musician, he's So I
Yeah.
mean, is that why is there any is any
Yeah.
of the motivation to do the tours to show that that you're not just
Um,
this synthy guy?
well, I mean, I don't feel that I have to do it. It is something that I really enjoy. So that's the main motivation. I mean, I don't mind if there's a a, a sort of a side benefit, which is that people do. I think I've passed the point where I feel I need to prove anything to anybody. I know it's like um, it's just I but I love doing those things, and I love playing with great musicians. I have eclectic taste about music. I love anything that's good, that's done well. I'm not, I don't just like electronic music. I love classical music. I love jazz. You know, I mean, uh, it's no, I just love doing those things. I mean, we do in the live show now. We do an acoustic bit, but it's just to kind of create another light relief from the electronic sound, and you know, more sort of intimate connection with the audience during that time and things like that. It's not to show off any kind of ability, no.
Were you, I'm wondering, you were so obviously I grew up in America and I grew up in LA and you were so huge here. You had so many you had quite a few top 10 hits here and you were on MTV all the time. Were you bigger in America or England, or were you as big in England as you were here?
Definitely bigger in America.
I wondered.
Yeah, yeah, which was and is still unusual.
Yeah, do you have any I mean, were you surprised by it? Do you have any theories as to why like there was something about your music, your lyrics, your look, or whatever that kind of like resonated more with America? I mean, I know you had hits in England too, but like specifically resonated here.
Well, actually, I just feel that I think that with people who knew about making records, and people who wrote songs and bands and artists and keyboard players and musicians, they actually got what I was doing. They understood that actually it was something like really, really worth sort of taking note of and going, oh, you know, how's that? How's he doing that? How does that done? How do you do a one man show, and how do you get those sounds and all that stuff? And I think there was a much I maybe it's because you're coming from England, and you you get the benefit of the doubt, whereas in the UK it's hard to get the benefit of the doubt. You know, you get put in a
Mm.
box, and that's where you stay, sort of thing. But America was much more understanding of what I was doing.
I mean, obviously the press here is very different too than it was compared to the UK, especially back then. But I actually wondered if it was maybe what we were talking about before, like, the anthemicness,
Hmm.
the hopefulness of the lyrics that maybe resonated with
Yeah,
American listeners more. I
I
would theorize that's the case.
I think that is a big part of it as well. I think that's a big part of it, and I love that. I'm very pleased about that. That it was taken in that way. You know, in a genuinely positive way. Yeah.
I've read that Like to Get to Know You Well was inspired by the LA Olympics, which I remember. I was living here as a child in 1984. We do have the LA Olympics coming up again in
Yeah.
2028, so maybe we could get you out here for that. But is that true? Was it that supposed to be an
Yeah. I
Olympic?
mean, I had not approached anybody to do the Olympics or anything, but I just made that connection myself, that would be the sort of theme that would be appropriate, you know, where people from literally from all around the world come together, um, and there's no barriers between anyone. They're doing sport, and they just want to, and when those people get together, they have fun together, and it's like there's no discrimination, there's no judgment, there's no, you know, we're all sportsmen, we're all doing something, and I thought that's the sentiment of the song.
When you performed at Live Aid, were you in Wembley or were you at Philadelphia?
I was in Wembley,
Okay. What
although we were touring America at the time, but I wanted to do it in Wembley because that it was my home.
What
you know.
memories do you have of that? I mean, that's the biggest
Oh,
stadium literally anyone's
yeah.
ever, well, if you take it as that before live streams, that was, I mean, I still think that holds the record as the most widely watched music like thing on TV ever.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't
Crazy.
think you could ever do a bigger gig than that. I mean, so, well, I don't know where to start really. I mean, uh, it was incredible day. Just literally flying in on a helicopter with, Brian May from Queen was like pretty epic. I hung out with Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney,
Wow.
not just saying hello, but for half an hour. I met David Bowie, and who had obviously been following my career because he was saying things about me that I just couldn't believe it, and that was massive for me. And then doing the song, and we were talking about me being the synthesizer guy. Well, I played piano, so people were going, "Oh my God, he's going to play piano! This is going to be a disaster." But I've been playing the piano since I was 7. It was the most natural thing. And I did Hide and Seek, which was not one of the big hits. It was a song that I thought would be appropriate for the occasion. And the audience joined in with me on the chorus, and it was sublime. It was a sublime feeling that I still remember it now. I can still feel it now. It's there embedded with all the adrenaline that was going on. And so yeah, it was just so brilliant to be part of it. It was for a great reason and great cause. And saw one of the greatest performances of all time, Queen, doing their show. I mean, nobody's going
Wow.
to do that ever. And it was just one of those moments that you feel so privileged to be part of. It's like, yeah, I was part of that. I was part of Live Aid. Yeah.
Did you
It's good.
guest with anyone? Because I just interviewed Tom
No,
Bailey and he was like Madonna was on his set. He was singing back up on Madonna. There was a lot of cross stuff going on. He was in
no,
Philly though.
no, the Brits don't do that so well.
There you go. Well, I mentioned the synthesizer showdown, and I know you chuckle when I said that, but
Hmm.
seriously, I'm not even, this is not even hyperbole. I'm not blowing smoke. That's my favorite Grammy moment of all time.
Oh, great.
I was very young, but I was gathered around watching the Grammys, appointment television. It was a big event, obviously, and it looked like I'd never seen anything like that. Like I was, to have all four of you, and I mean, Herbie had a hit on MTV at the time with Rocket, but actually, honestly, I probably wasn't even aware that he was this kind of elder statesman of jazz thing. I probably just thought he was a new wave star like anyone else on MTV. But like to have, him and Stevie kind of representing an older guard of like,
Yeah.
legendary keyboardists, and then you and Thomas Dolby, like the newer guard, and just
Yeah.
the way it was set up and how Tom had the wig on and all. I was just like, this is amazing. I like asked for a synthesizer for my birthday. I got one, but I never got very good at it. But I did get one. And
Yeah.
I know it's probably like some people sort of like maybe look at it and it looks kind of silly and they chuckle or they've forgotten about it. But like I thought it was so cool. And like I just would love to like know, when you're talking about how you were like hanging out with Paul McCartney or David Bowie, like it must have been quite exciting for you to be on stage with Stevie Wonder and Herbie Hancock and Thomas Dolby doing that on the Grammys.
It was absolutely great. I mean, it's a very, I think it was a very significant moment because what it did was it suddenly changed the view of all this new technology that people were using, like me and Tom were pioneering, and then, but those guys were using it as well. And Stevie was known for his embracing of new keyboards and new technology and stuff. So it was like, yeah, I mean, okay, these instruments are you know, electronic, but it's just another instrument. There's nothing to be worried about. They're not going to take over your world and steal your children. It's just another way of working, and it changed the whole. I mean, on a Queen record, they said no synthesizers were used in the making of this record, and all that stuff. Like it was pathetic, and that put that was a full stop. That thinking was dead after that show. But it was great, wasn't it? I mean, I got to hang out with Stevie in his studio
Oh,
and jam with him, just me and him. I mean, and how what an amazing thing to be able to say that you did. You know, like we were just trading riffs back and forth and jamming on various keyboards that he had around the studio, and I'll never ever forget that. And it was like, yeah, this is. I mean, and Herbie was an amazing man as well. So yeah, it was a moment for me and a moment for keyboard players and electronic musicians around the world. I think it was a really significant moment.
I kind of forgot about, I mean, now everybody plays some form of synthesizer electronic music. People make music in their bedrooms and have huge hits.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the pop, I kind of forgot about the fact at one time keyboards were considered the enemy, I guess, of
Yes.
rock.
Yes.
What was the mood in the room? I guess it was probably at the Shrine. Where you were at that time. What was the mood in the room at the Grammys? Because I imagine there were like a lot of old guard record executives and musicians there. Were they looking at like you guys like what the hell is this, or were they like into it?
I mean, as far as I can tell, people were really enjoying it, and it was so unique. I mean, I don't know how many keyboards we had arrayed around us. I mean, there was dozens, and um, yeah, I mean, I mean, I picked up. I hadn't been to the Grammys before, so I wouldn't know that to compare it with anything else. But I certainly thought that people were really digging it and enjoying it. Yeah.
Were you intimidated? Because if I mean, you were probably the youngest of the four, and you were
Mm.
definitely the newest artist of the four because, you know, Thomas Dolby's hits in America predated yours by 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Um, but you probably at that point were having the one that was on the charts
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
recently. But were, you know, being that you were kind of the young guy in that foursome, were you, and you got Stevie right there, were you intimidated at all by the
I
situation?
I I I I didn't feel intimidated actually. I mean, I should have probably felt a bit. I think it was probably to do with the fact that I, you know, I'd hung out in the studio with Stevie, and like I said, you know, we just jammed together. So there was I mean, he kept going, so he must have enjoyed it. It wasn't like he was grinding his way through. It was like we were having fun, having this musical dialogue, and I think that you know, I'd grown up with his music, studying his music, you know, and learning to play his music. So I think, but that when we jammed together, I kind of got over any sort of terror of being, you know, of being intimidated. Yeah, that's my recollection. I mean, it's difficult. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, I know. And there were no ego clashes or anything
Yeah.
like that behind
But
the scenes.
but I just enjoyed it. It was such fun to be there in LA at the Grammys with this amazing, you know, to be in the company of those great legendary people. I mean, it was, but it felt right. You know, I didn't feel like wrong. I mean, you know, me and Tom were bringing those instruments you know, to the public and showing how they could be used. So I think I felt certain pride about that. Yeah.
Last couple questions I have just about that is obviously it has made this impression on me. We're talking about so many years later. And you know, you've talked about how it sort of changed people's perception of synthesizers, but in the moment or right after it happened, like that night, did you feel you were making history at the time, or is that something you just sort of came to realize much later on?
Mm. No, I did. I think I did realize what whoever came up with that idea was trying to do. They were trying to put the record straight. And I think you know, was a moment, you know, that, yeah, suddenly, oh, yeah, these keyboards, they're great. You know, and I've talked to people, you know, like, you know, I get to visit LA more now, and I've talked to people like David Pace, you know, and he said that, yeah, we used to put your records on in the studio and study what you were doing. And, you know, so I think that was, you know, that's the difference between the perception of me in America and the perception of me in the UK. It's so
Oh,
radically different. So,
interesting.
but yeah, but there we are. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm not moaning.
I
I'm
didn't
so
think,
lucky to be where I am and doing what I do.
oh,
That's
I didn't take it that way, but it's interesting because, obviously not just synthesizers, but electronic music in general. I mean, I think even now it maybe doesn't get the respect among some sort of raucous types. I mean, look how it took 6 nominations for Kraftwerk to get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Pardon my language, but what the hell?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what the fuck, basically. I mean,
yeah.
all music goes back, in my opinion, to all pop music goes back to either Kraftwerk or the Beatles, for I think.
Mm,
And yeah, so I guess that you being at the forefront of that, obviously new wave was what they called new wave was huge in the early mid 80s, but you being at the very forefront of it, like I said at the beginning of this interview, like actually with a keyboard strapped to you, like,
mm.
I guess it's sort of an open-ended question, but you definitely changed people's minds, but why were people so resistant? Like, why did people think that music just had to be made with guitar, bass, drums? And there's still people that feel that way. There's
Yeah,
still people that feel that way.
yeah. Well, I think, I mean, I was shocked too, because I always thought, rock and roll culture, pop music culture and rock and roll culture was the alternative, open-minded, embracing, not box ticking, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, it's the opposite of what I thought. People like they're not embracing change. They're ridiculing new things. They're not embracing change and in new ideas. They're not supporting young people doing new stuff. And so I was a bit shocked with that, but that's the way. You just have to keep going. And I think the thing is, just you got to be who you are and don't compromise on that. Be who you are. Just do it, and people will come and they'll listen and they'll like it. And if they don't, they'll listen to something else. It's just easy.
Did you ever mention that when you're in the helicopter with Brian May? Be like, hey, why'd you say that on your record? You had a moment, you had a captive audience.
No, but I got to do band stuff with him when we were doing the Prince's Trust concert, and I was in the band, he was in the band, and he was always really respectful to me, and I felt very, very supported by him. He's a very, very nice man. I don't know where that came from.
He probably softened, it was probably just the cool thing to say. Like then it was like no MIDI to like no MIDI or something. Um,
Yes.
you could
I
have
think
like an album that says all MIDI. Just talking about the anthemics thing of your
hmm.
record. Do you have any specific stories that come to mind if people have said a song like, things can only get better or whatever, or any of your songs like helped them,
Yeah.
like they wrote you a
Oh.
letter or whatever, anything like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, so many that I wouldn't know where to begin with that. That I know it's made a difference to people, and that's what you want, isn't it? I mean, that's your legacy. That's your legacy. It's not anything else. It's like not how many records you sold, whether it had an impact on people. And I've had so many. Uh, um, there's a song called "Specialty" on Dream Into Action that particularly people. It really meant a lot to them. You know, by the time you realize your specialty, there's no one like you. Spend your life worrying what you could have been. Can't you like being you? And people felt liberated by that. So, and good. That's great. I'm so
Awesome.
happy with that.
Yeah. And you obviously figured out your specialty. Well, I'll just put this out there. Next year
Yeah,
is the 40th anniversary of the Synthesizer Showdown.
yeah.
Would you
Right.
consider getting Herbie and Stevie and Thomas together and redo it somewhere? I will be in the front row. Or at the Grammys. I mean, would you
Right.
ever do that? Would you ever recreate this
Oh,
moment?
yeah.
You
Oh
could
yeah.
maybe
I
do it
would.
with some younger synth players
Yeah.
as well.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I mean, my friend BT, who's like a genius keyboard guy, it'd be good to have him there. Yeah. What a great idea.
You and
Great.
Thomas maybe as representing the old guard now,
Yes.
and have
Yes.
two BT and some other synthesizer player and do it again. I would love it.